Ladies and gentlemen, fellas, welcome back to the channel and the podcast. Today, we are going down through my top 25 overall rankings. Now, what does this mean? It means every single position in one. So you're going to see running backs, wide receivers. You're probably not going to see quarterbacks, and you're probably not going to see tight ends, but you might. So you have to stick to the end. It's going to be right on the borderline of where I start to rank some tight ends, those elite, the mega elites of Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and a little bit later on, Mark Andrews. But top 25 right now. Again, I have a top 50 or top 150 overall. That's on the draft kit. I have my individual rankings for each position. That's on the draft kit. It's about 70 running backs, 100 wide receivers. I want to say somewhere around like 50 tight ends, and same thing for quarterbacks, like 40 quarterbacks. That is for both PPR and non-PPR right now, so you can check that out if you are interested at the Supreme Draft Guide. All the information on that and how to get it currently at 66% off a limited time offer is linked in the description below. But welcome, my name is Sal Vetri, cover fantasy sports in a variety of different areas, but the head honcho right here, the 1A, 1B with golf, is the NFL. And the NFL season is vastly and very quickly approaching. By the time I'm recording this and scheduling it out, there should be about a month or so until the season starts. So I thought it'd be a good time to kind of settle back in, see where I'm at overall, those top 25 rankings, depending on how many people in your league. If you're in a standard league, which is around 12 teams, it'll be about the first 2 rounds of the draft. If you're just in a 10-team league, it'll be about the first 2 to 2.5 rounds of the draft, right? Kind of gives you a good idea of where I'm ranking things earlier. What you're going to get to see and gauge from this overall is, oh damn, Sal just has no interest in so-and-so based on where he's ranking him because his ADP is going to go way higher than that. Or Sal is pretty bullish, meaning he's very bold and he's actually pretty confident in this player because he's ranking him pretty farly ahead of, or maybe only like 3 or 4 spots, but that usually means that he's going to be getting him before the consensus and before the market does. So I think these videos are pretty fun to do and look over. It kind of is a nice breakup and refreshing option from the videos that I think are very informative, right? All your must-own rookie running backs, must-own just running backs in general, sleeper type plays, right? All that is very informative, and I think it helps us build a very strong draft strategy going in. But this type of stuff, analyzing rankings for value, I think is very important as well. And at any point during the video, if you have something that you want to say, if you're higher on somebody, if you're kind of questioning why, and I don't explain well enough in this video why I'm higher on somebody, just let me know in the comments down below. I'm happy to answer all those, try and get to as many comments as I can. So you can follow me on Twitter as well, at SalVetriDFS, and at me over there if you want to as well. So appreciate you all being here. Hit that like button before we get into it. Big old subscribe button pops up on the screen. I really do appreciate all the support. We are crushing through in subscribers right now. This NFL season is definitely helping. And if you enjoy these videos at all, just take a second of your time, totally free, hitting the subscribe button and notification bell. That actually does help it reach more people. So just by doing that, it allows it to reach probably just each person 10 to 20 more people. It's what YouTube algorithm does when you subscribe within the video. So I do greatly appreciate that. But let's get into it. We'll start with the first 5 names on this list and we'll work down from there. And all these 5 guys have something in common. They're all running backs. And if you've been watching my content, you know that I value running backs pretty highly. Now, if you're playing in a different type of scoring format, these are obviously not going to be the same type of rankings, right? These are PPR and non-PPR for standard league scoring, right? PPR, 1 point per reception. You're going to be getting 6 points per touchdown, 0.1 yards per yards, those types of things. If you're playing in a league where wide receivers are getting 2 points per reception, then obviously those guys are going to be ranked higher. But this is just going to be standard based. So I'm very high and very bullish on running backs. And what these top 5 running backs all have in common is they're all pretty much workhorse running backs in their offense and have pass catching ability and upside, especially the first 4 guys that you're going to see here. So pretty standard for me. My first 4, I think, is similar to a lot of people. Now I know there's some people out there that want to be ranking Alvin Kamara second or third based on the fact that he dealt with a bum ankle for a month last year and it probably lingered for half the season. But we could say the exact same thing about Saquon Barkley. For me, in terms of the tiers of how I have this 150, Saquon, McCaffrey, and Ezekiel Elliott are in a tier of their own. Now I'm pretty tempted to put Zeke into tier 2 just with Alvin Kamara. I'm kind of on the borderline of doing that, but what I'm pretty much trying to say there is that Saquon and Christian McCaffrey for me heading into this year are very similar running backs, and I don't think the gap is that far off. Now, yes, Christian McCaffrey touched the ball 403 times last year, but to expect Christian McCaffrey to touch the ball 400 plus times again this year, one, we would have to expect the Panthers defense to be bad. It probably will be, and them to be trailing in games. And they probably will be, so that helps. But 2, we would have to expect him to be mega durable, which he has been his whole year, but the more and more you take wear and tear on that body, it's similar to Ezekiel Elliott. These guys have not been injured yet, but it is going to happen. He plays a very fragile position as a smaller running back, and yes, it's been almost maybe not a miracle that he hasn't been hurt yet. There's ways that you can prevent injury, but 403 touches is going to cause him, I would say, at some point, either this year or next year, if he takes on that type of a workload, to miss some games. It's just exactly what happens when you take that type of a beating. But yeah, what you're getting from him is just number ones in snaps, targets, goal line carries, receptions, all that stuff last year. He was obviously the best player in fantasy football up there with Lamar Jackson. And it's by no means a slight to say that I think Saquon is very close or a lot closer than people expect. Now, I still have McCaffrey 1 overall, but the reason Saquon is 2 overall is he also missed a month of the season last year with a bung ankle. That lingered for the second half of the season probably, but he actually started to produce the exact same way that he did in his rookie year towards the end of the season when he was starting starting to get healthier. Now what you're giving Saquon is a new offensive line. That should help. 4th overall pick, got some offensive linemen as well in free agency, and all they did in the draft was just pile on 3 offensive linemen. We're betting a little bit here on the fact that Daniel Jones will take a step forward in his second year, hopefully not fumble as much, so the game scripts are fine. But even if he does fumble more, it should help Saquon in the receiving department. So Saquon just being healthy now, right? Having about a month to a month and a half of the season lingering with an injury and just missing games last year is obviously a huge impact. So we're just taking and betting on the fact that they drafted 3 offensive linemen, the fact that he was still able to produce in 2019 over 1,000 yards rushing and catch 52 passes while missing a month of the season, still be one of the top running backs in the NFL. And I expect that to continue. So those are my top 2. And number 3 is just what you're going to get from Zeke. Back-to-back years now, if you take the 2 seasons, he's been number 1 in red zone touches. He was number 1 last year with 4.2 per game. Just an absolute monster. 300 carries on the ground. I mean, we talk about like Christian McCaffrey having 403 touches. That's insane. But the fact that Ezekiel Elliott has been so durable and had 355 touches last year, quietly had 54 receptions, right? A guy who popped off for receptions 2 years back, but last year didn't have as many, but still had 54. Anything above 50 is going to get into that elite territory, especially if you're getting good usage on the ground, which Ezekiel Elliott is. On the offensive line, they lose Travis Frederick, the center who retires, but they end up getting a very strong offensive lineman out of Wisconsin, kind of a steal, I believe, later in the draft, 3rd or 4th round pick. And now you're going to have just this bulletproof offense that a guy who led the league in red zone touches last year is probably going to be there again. CeeDee Lamb coming out of the slot, Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper on the outsides, and I still think the hands are fine. Now, Ezekiel Elliott's body is a little bit built more up to be beaten, but there's no doubt about it that I'm not going to say that McCaffrey taking on 403 touches last year and getting all these touches and is not getting hurt. There's no doubt about it that Ezekiel Elliott has been running good in terms of not being ultra injured or really missing any time. So that is also a concern. Now, how do you account for that? I don't really think that you can. I'm not going to be ranking Ezekiel Elliott 7th this year and saying, I hope he doesn't get hurt, right? It's just at least something to keep in the back of your mind when you're taking guys around this, that these guys are literally taking 350 to 400 touches last year and really in their career for Zeke, 300 plus touch seasons, and he's just taking the beatings and it's been fine for him. Part of that is because the offensive line allows him to get a lot of yards before contact. Part of that is just the way that his body is built and he runs lower to the ground. So Ezekiel Elliott is number 3 for me, and Kamara will be number 4. Alvin Kamara is number 4, and he had a bum ankle last year, right? You have the Saquon Barkleys, the Alvin Kamara's, guys who had bum ankles, and that's obviously just going to linger for your probably entire season. He was dealing with major touchdown regression until the final month of the season where he just piled on touchdowns, right? He only had 1 game with touchdowns. He had 2 touchdowns in that game. I think it was week 3 of last year. And then he went until the final 3 weeks of the season without scoring any touchdowns. And I think he scored 4 in 3 weeks. So he kind of got back to where he needed to last year in that department, scoring 6 overall touchdowns. Funny thing about Alvin Kamara is, fun fact, 3 straight seasons with 81 receptions for him. He had 97 targets last year, 3 straight with 81 receptions. So if you factor in that he doesn't miss a couple of those games, he's probably pushing upwards of 90 to 92 receptions last year. He's running behind a good offensive lineman that, although they kind of cut one of their offensive linemen, they drafted another one in the NFL draft early on. So you're getting a good running back here with versatility who should be pushing upwards of 110 targets in this offense or close to it. At least over 100 is what my projections right now say, about 105 for about 87 receptions. And that's just only part of the puzzle. He saw his highest snap percentage last year with no Mark Ingram. Latavius Murray did come in and kind of play the Mark Ingram role, but to a lesser extent. When Alvin Kamara was healthy, Latavius Murray was only touching the ball about 6.5 times per game. Now, obviously, when Kamara missed those games, Murray was touching it 30 times in those 2 games. But when Mark Ingram was there, Mark Ingram was seeing 10 to 12 to sometimes 15 touches in a game. So you saw Kamara's overall touches go up in games when he was healthy compared to when he was with Mark Ingram in the past, and also his snap percentage. So you're getting closer to this workhorse back in Alvin Kamara. And I mean, if you look at it last year, factoring in receptions, he had 252 touches while missing 2 games. You factor that out across a 16-game season, he's going to be getting you closer to around a 275 touch season, and that's very good for how elusive he is and especially how dominant he is in the passing game. And just how consistent he has been in the passing game, you factor in the offensive line, Drew Brees, this offense in general, how it flows through Michael Thomas and Kamara. That's why I have him ranked 4th ahead of the next couple of guys we're going to talk about, one of them being Joe Mixon. So these top 4 guys are sort of the mega elites in running back. If you have a top 4 pick, I feel pretty strongly about getting McCaffrey, Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, or Alvin Kamara. I'd feel fine about any of those guys. And you could debate that you want Kamara 3rd and Zeke 4th, and that's fine for me. I like the overall offense of Dallas, and I can see Ezekiel Elliott, which he has not yet really had, pop off for a massive season of 20 touchdowns, right? And it's hard to do that in general. He had 14 last year, but the amount of red zone touches he's going to get, his 14 touchdowns, I don't know if regression is due on those, right? It's 14 total touchdowns. You could tell me that he's going to score 9 or 10 rushing touchdowns and 4 receiving touchdowns, and I'd say, yeah, that makes sense based on how often this team is probably going to be in the red zone. So I unleashed a couple more guys in the rankings, and you're going to see that number 5 right now for me is Joe Mixon. I have him ahead of Dalvin Cook. As I record this, there are concerns about Dalvin Cook holding out. There are also slight concerns about Alvin Kamara and Joe Mixon that just haven't been talked about as much. I assume based on his skill set and how much he means to the team, Kamara would get paid and probably paid the most. I assume based on how much he's probably going to ask for, if they're similar to what Derrick Henry did and didn't ask for top dollar and just said, I understand my role in this team and I understand what my value is in the market, I'll just take the 5th highest paid salary in the league, is what Derrick Henry did. If Joe Mixon is doing that, and it sounds like he is based on how quiet he's being with the team and maybe working with them, an organization in Cincinnati that usually doesn't pay their players top dollar, just hence look at AJ Green, hence look at all the quarterbacks that they've had in the past that they've let go, any half decent ones. I mean, they literally made Carson Palmer want to retire, and he did retire for a little sprint there. So yeah, I think that Joe Mixon right now, perfect combination of just his ability to generate yards on his own. He was number 1 in evaded tackles last year, and also the ability to actually pick up receptions. Now, Giovanni Bernard's behind him, Trevion Williams, but these guys are just, for the most part, unproven. Rodney Anderson, Trevion Williams, unproven guys behind him. And Giovanni Bernard has been one of the worst yards created backs in the league and least efficient running backs in the league. This is not the Giovanni Bernard from his rookie year when he was actually looking decent out there. No, this Giovanni Bernard is #not good, but Joe Mixon is out there looking very good. I mean, Joe Mixon, you're looking at last year what he was able to do. He was able to produce a 300-touch season, and I like that out of Joe Mixon. And he was able to be number 1 in evaded tackles and be productive, especially down the stretch in a season where he was running behind the 2nd worst offensive line. Now, the issue, they're going to get Jonah Williams back on the offensive line, big piece for them, but the issue is this offensive line still sucks. The positive would be that they don't trail as much in games because the defense slightly improves, but also that Joe Burrow is there. We'll see with no offseason if that's going to help. Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, some rookies coming into this offense, AJ Green coming back. If the offense overall is going to be better, it means that Joe Mixon, somebody who was already able to produce unevaded tackles and his own yards created, and really that's all he's done since coming into the league. Now maybe you throw in a little bit more touchdowns than he's seen in the past and red zone opportunities, and it makes Joe Mixon a pretty strong play. Number 6 for me is Dalvin Cook. If there's an extension before the season starts, and I'm expecting this to happen, then I'll just flip-flop back Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon. You could even put Dalvin Cook ahead of Kamara if you really wanted to argue about it, but right now Dalvin Cook's 6 for me. Look, last year he was just an absolute beast. Misses the final few games of the season with that injury. He's currently in a holdout period where you can go back and watch my Dalvin Cook holdout video. I don't think he has much leverage. You can argue and say, yes, he does. He just doesn't show up for camp, and then he gets to accrue his season for next year. That's fine. I think that that's a pretty sound argument, but when it actually comes down to it, the amount of money that he's going to miss, since he was a 2nd-round pick and not a 1st-round pick, is actually a lot. It would be like his whole entire season in fines, and then you're just kind of losing a year of pay just so that you can hold out and hopefully get paid next year, which they're probably not going to do since you're a year older, right? So this becomes very messy for him at that point. Not as much leverage, or really any out there. I would say he has like very small leverage, and that leverage kind of comes down to just not getting paid this year because of your fines. But you saw what he did last year. He had over a 300-touch season in just 14 games, took a huge step forward in the passing game. This is what we wanted to see out of Dalvin Cook. Can he be independent, right? So when we're ranking him next to these other guys, I think that all the other guys above him outside of Joe Mixon, and we already talked about why I have Joe Mixon ahead of him because of the holdout, but those other 4 mega elites, I think they have better pass catching roles and or red zone roles, right? I think Dalvin Cook is very close to Ezekiel Elliott, but when you want to compare the two of them, you compare the injuries in a major way at that point. I don't really like looking at injuries, but when you're comparing close calls, right? Dalvin Cook, a guy who's going to get a lot of red zone touches. Dalvin Cook, who popped off for a 50-plus reception season, very similar to what you saw at Zeke last year, except I would say Zeke's in a better offense and a more stable offense behind a better offensive line for sure. You could see that this Minnesota offensive line has been bad, but Dalvin Cook's been able to succeed, so is Kirk Cousins behind it. So that's one, but 2, Zeke's just been so durable. So that's why Dalvin Cook's down here below Zeke, below Kamara. It's just not as stable when it comes to health, not as stable about his whole contract situation, and not as stable of an offensive line. But if he continues to take this step forward in the passing game and be able to put up 50 to 60 reception seasons, yeah, he's going to cement himself as a top 5 running back in the league, and I think he's already right there. And finally, as we round out the top 7, Michael Thomas. So the first receiver goes off the board here. I don't even want to really be taking Michael Thomas at this point either, to be honest with you, but it's just a sure thing at this point. Drew Brees, is there going to be a cliff or a wall for him? There's an argument for that, but based on how short he's throwing these passes to Michael Thomas, based on how good Michael Thomas can be after the catch, yeah, it's just going to be your first wide receiver off the board. He's my wide receiver 1. He's my only wide receiver right now in the top 10, which is a little bit of a spoiler alert. The rest are running backs, so 9 running backs to just 1 receiver. So it kind of goes to show how much I actually do value Michael Thomas compared to the rest of the wide receivers. But that being said, I'm probably not going to get him as much. I know people are taking Michael Thomas 3rd overall. I know a lot of people are taking him in the top 5, definitely the top 6. So normally when it comes to 7th, he's not there. And usually if he's there at 7th, I still might even take like a Miles Sanders or a Derrick Henry over him. So I have him 7th overall because more times than not, that's where I want to be taking him. But it really does depend on the league and what my league mates are trying to do and what I know they're trying to do in that draft. Next up are the next 7 fellas on the board. Be sure to hit that like button for me one time and the big old subscribe button that pops up. It really does help if you want to get access to this full top 50 in these rankings, going to be constantly updated. All the rankings will be updated. All the information and tiers will be constantly updated. You can check that out in the Supreme Draft Guide down below. Not only is it just a top 150, but it's rankings for every position. It's tiers for every position, very helpful in your drafts. It's going to be key stats, key player profiles, all this type of stuff, databases. So check it all out if you are indeed interested. Down below, limited time offer, 66% off. Now what you get is 8th overall is going to be another running back. So is 9th, so is 10th. So 3 running backs in a row here. Look, Derrick Henry for me is a guy that I can't really figure out. I'm not trying to draft him. I have very little Derrick Henry. Look, it's the fact that, yes, he led the league in attempts last year, 2 more than Zeke with 303 on the ground. He led the league in rushing yards last year with 1,539. But he lost Jack Conklin, a pretty big piece of that offensive line. And they did replace it with a first-round pick, but you had a guy who scored 18 touchdowns last year, only on a 5.6% rate, so it's not like he's due to regress based off of efficiency. He just had so much volume. But I want to bank on this year that overall this Tennessee defense outperformed itself last year. I think they're naturally just going to regress this year. I want to bank on the fact that, in general, if they're going to regress, teams figure out Derrick Henry a little bit and they force Ryan Tannehill to beat them. So I'm personally betting on A.J. Brown, on Ryan Tannehill, on Jonnu Smith in the passing game of this offense because they've done this for 2 years in a row now. Derrick Henry has kept up an efficiency standpoint of being in yards created standpoint in the top 2, leading it last year, second the year before. And that's just something that's so hard to do. And it speaks to the big dog Derrick Henry himself. He's an absolute monster and a beast. And in non-PPR formats, he's going to be a higher ranked player for me. I think in my top 150 non-PPR or my rankings, he's like 2 spots higher. But when it comes to PPR formats, it's just so hard to trust the guy. Now, he has increased his receptions in each of his past 3 years in the league, but it's gone up by like 2. So if you're okay taking 20 receptions from Derrick Henry this year, I mean, maybe you just sign yourself up for that and hope that it doesn't regress down to like 14 or 15, but I'm not as confident in that number. So I do think there's a little bit of regression coming in. I mean, being the leading player in yards created and carries on the ground and overall yards on the ground, you're probably just going to regress. Being number 2 in touchdowns with 18, you're probably just going to regress. So when all that's factored in, when I'm betting on the passing game a little bit more, when I'm betting on the defense getting a little bit worse, meaning that you're probably not going to be leading or have as much game script opportunity in positive game script or neutral game script for Derrick Henry, it makes him a little bit worse of a play. Now, he's obviously a top 8 pick for me and pretty much a staple top 10 pick still for me, but it's hard for me to get him in my top 5 or top 6 running backs just because of 1, the passing game role, and 2, some areas of regression that are probably coming for him, and I'm betting on that passing game more. Now, this might be a spot for debate, Nick Chubb versus Miles Sanders, and maybe something that I want to get in your opinion. Nick Chubb, a stable horse, which obviously has Kareem Hunt behind him, but a new offensive coordinator in Stefanski there, maybe some 2 tight end sets coming in, an improved offensive line for sure, getting Jedrick Willis in the draft, getting Jack Conklin from Derrick Henry, who we just talked about. So that's all set up to be very nice. You had this guy have 298 carries last year, was just 5 off of being the leading rusher, 3rd behind Zeke and Derrick Henry. He did catch 36 passes, but a lot of it started to go downhill last year when you ended up seeing Kareem Hunt step in the receiving department and overall fantasy points per game for the second half of the season. Nick Chubb ranked as the 25th overall back because of Kareem Hunt coming in and taking his receptions and taking some of his rushes away and also just a little bit of the touchdowns. And then you have Miles Sanders in here, who's maybe the hype beast of them all, right? He's the Aaron Jones of last year, although Aaron Jones never really hyped up this much to being like a top 10 pick and going like 6th overall. I have Sanders as 10th overall, top 10 pick. And I think there is a debate for Miles Sanders versus Nick Chubb. Look, I have Nick Chubb slightly ahead right now. It's mainly because of the fact that I think that Nick Chubb can still see 300 touches on the ground alone in this offense. And last year you saw him get a lot of red zone touches and just not get in the end zone. If Nick Chubb sees as many red zone and as much green zone inside the 10-yard line touches as he did last year, he's going to score probably 2 to 3 more touchdowns. He had 8 touchdowns last year. That's a fine number. But based on the amount of red zone touches that he had, top 5 in the league, and other running backs who had that top 5 or top 8 number, he should have probably had another 3 or 4 touchdowns. He was the least likely in terms of percentages, or he had the lowest percentage of overall touchdown conversions inside the 10-yard line, and it was by a wide margin. So due to regress there for sure. I mean, I think in one game he had 4 carries from the 1-yard line, and he ended up getting stuffed on all of them. So that just speaks to the offensive line's push in general on that offensive line at the goal line. So Miles Sanders being the guy who gets hyped up right now, I have him at 10th overall. I think he's going to catch a lot more passes this year since he's going to play the more than 50% of the snaps. No Jordan Howard. He averaged 19.6 touches per game down the stretch when there was no Jordan Howard. That's my top 10 right now. And then you get to start to see some of these second-tier running backs kind of for me, maybe even third-tier running backs, right? And then you get to see some of these top-tier wide receivers that are just behind Michael Thomas. Devontae Adams, I think he's a first-round pick in 12-team formats, but I think he's a late first-round pick. Julio Jones, 11th and 12th. So I have Adams ahead of Julio because I think Adams' target share is going to be insane. Adams, when he has played in the last 3 years of games, is number 1 ahead of DeAndre Hopkins in red zone targets and red zone touchdowns. I think that only goes up this year. And Alan Lazard is their wide receiver 2 and Devin Funchess as the wide receiver 3, who's basically a tight end in his past years. So I do think that the man who led the league in red zone percentage last year in Devontae Adams is going to continue to. The man who has 2 997-yard seasons and injured seasons, only one 1,000-yard season, but 2 997-yard seasons, and has been getting left off of a lot of these top 5 and top 10 wide receiver lists. Just absolute blasphemy to channel inner Stephen A. Smith sit there. He's my wide receiver 2. Julio Jones, wide receiver 3, going to be approaching maybe his final year of not peakness. I think he's already past his peak in his prime, but his final year of very productive years of being able to be like a 1,300, 1,400 yard receiver, like he was last year, just finishing 6 yards short of 1,400 yards, being number 2 in targets. Team threw the most in the league, right up there with the Buccaneers, I think tied exactly for most attempts per game. So this is a situation where, yeah, I do like these two guys. It's just I'm probably getting a running back before them, and then they probably go before my second round pick. 13th and 14th is another two running backs that are kind of interesting for me to debate. I can kind of debate between all these guys, right? Like, who do I want? I kind of feel good about the guys in my top 10 at running back, but then who do I want when I come back around for my second pick? Let's say I'm picking 10th and I get Miles Sanders. Now I'm picking 13th. Do I want Josh Jacobs? Do I want Kenyon Drake? Do I want Austin Eckler? If I'm trying to go back-to-back running backs here, it's a little bit difficult. As of right now, I have it ranked Josh Jacobs ahead of Kenyon Drake and Austin Eckler, mainly because of the pedigree that you saw in his first year. I just think that he's a borderline shoo-in now to see, at least on the ground alone, if he plays 16 games, a 300-touch season. In 13 games last year, playing injured for the final 2 or 3, he saw 242 carries on the ground, and he did catch 20 passes. So he was on pace to catch around 25 passes. Not terrible for a guy who has no pass-catching upside, but when you factor in if he would have played 3 more games last year, he's definitely probably approaching that 300-plus touch season as a rookie. And I think that we can bank on that based on previous seasons of rookie running backs coming in and getting heavy workloads, being a consistent rusher, being the number 1 rookie rusher last year, top 8 in the NFL in yards created and evaded tackles. I don't think they're just going to go away from him, right? I know that there's talk Jalen Richard signed a deal. That is a concern. They got Lynn Bowden in the draft. That is a concern. But I still think that this man on the ground can see 300 touches alone. And if he catches 25 to 35 balls in the air, it's going to be a good season for Josh Jacobs. Whereas there are some question marks with guys like Kenyon Drake and Austin Eckler. I mean, Kenyon Drake, you can see 14th overall. There's some concerns there because, look, he's done it for what? 6 weeks last year, and he only had like 2 or 3 big weeks where he actually popped off, and he actually wasn't as efficient as a receiver as people expect him to. The reason that we like Kenyon Drake is there is upside for 350 touches, right? There is upside that Kenyon Drake catches 70 or 80 balls and has 250 to 260 touches on the ground. Like, that's upside is there. The Alvin Kamara type role in this offense is there for Kenyon Drake. The issue is we've seen guys like Alvin Kamara do it for 3 years now. We've seen Kenyon Drake not do it at all, although he was in Miami under Adam Gase. Maybe that factors in, but we saw him do it for a month of the season last year, and really, just like I said, 2 or 3 sporadic weeks where he really popped off, and he looked very good in those weeks, but there is a little bit of a concern. So that's the only reason why Kenyon Drake goes a little bit below Josh Jacobs. I think there's more stability in Josh Jacobs' role. I think there's at least overall a little bit more goal line opportunities as well, but Drake can make up for that pretty easily with the reception, so that's why he's going to be where he is right now. They're kind of neck and neck. Then you get 2 more wide receivers. My wide receiver 4 overall and Tyreek Hill. I just fixed the overall positional rankings. If you're watching the video, it was a little bit messed up. And then Kenny Golladay at 16th overall, my wide receiver 5. I like both of these guys. Matthew Stafford for the first 8 weeks last year. I think Dan Orlovsky just tweeted this. You ended up seeing him being the number 1 quarterback in the league last year. Through the first 8 weeks, number 1. He was the number 1 player. He was the number 2 fantasy scorer, only behind Lamar Jackson. But overall quarterback play, he was number 1 in the league. And Kenny Golladay was benefiting, but he didn't take a huge dip down when he had to play with guys like David Blau and Jeff Driscoll, right? Jeff Driscoll's best attribute was actually being able to run the ball for like 12 yards on a play, right? So when you're talking about Kenny Golladay still being able to finish where he did, a top 6, top 7 wide receiver last year, even having half of a season with terrible quarterback play, it just speaks to how good of a guy this is with jump ball percentage, with getting separation, overall having a 1,200-yard season and 11 touchdowns, 116 targets, 8 games with those terrible quarterbacks. Yeah, this is a guy who I think is going to take another step forward and kind of cement himself as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver. That's where I currently have him at as my wide receiver 5. So you can see the run of running backs now starts to begin here. It starts out with Todd Gurley, Leonard Fournette, Austin Eckler, Todd Gurley, Leonard Fournette. Eckler, my RB 12. Todd Gurley 13, Leonard Fournette 14. So I continue to move these guys up my board. Now to start the year, Leonard Fournette was like 16 or 17. Todd Gurley was like 15 or 16. Eckler is actually like 9 or 10. The reason I'm moving back Eckler is they drafted Joshua Kelly, and now there's going to be this battle between Joshua Kelly and Justin Jackson. Justin Jackson, the man who has been there and has been pretty productive when he actually gets touches. Joshua Kelly was out of UCLA and was very good there. In general, I think he fits this offense, coming out a little bit bigger than what Justin Jackson is size-wise. One of these guys might be Melvin Gordon. And if that's the case, Austin Eckler, who's been just in line for regression, not only just in volume, right? You lose Philip Rivers, historically one of the most check down quarterbacks with Drew Brees. So maybe now you're not going to be second only behind Christian McCaffrey in receptions, targets, and receiving yards for running backs, but maybe now you drop down to like 5th or 6th. That's going to be a huge blow for Austin Eckler. And what happens if he just doesn't pick up the overall volume in the rushing game that people are expecting him to? What happens if he's not carrying the ball 15 or 16 or 17 times a game and only carries the ball 8 to 10 times a game, and then he gets his 4 or 5 receptions, or maybe only 3 or 4 receptions with the mobile Tyrod Taylor running the ball and really throwing the ball for this offense and not checking it down as much? That becomes a concern. And also when you're number 1 in yards created per touch last year and you're number 1 in a lot of these overall efficiency metrics, that's going to be a little bit of an issue. I believe he was number 1 in yards per touch overall. And that number is just going to have to go down after the next year. Even if it drops to only 7th overall, it's still a good number, but that's going to be major regression. So I don't buy it that Austin Eckler is going to be a workhorse back the whole season for these guys, especially since they drafted Joshua Kelly. I think that this could be a guy who sees his 14 touches per game, but not his 18 to 20. 12 to 14 touches per game out of Austin Eckler is still very good if you're efficient, but it's hard to at least bank on that over guys below him and even right above him who might be seeing 18 to 22 touches per game. And that's where Todd Gurley and Leonard Fournette, who come in after him, start to creep up. Like they've already been creeping up my rankings, my overall rankings, and I want to continue to creep them up. I don't know if I'll get them over Eckler, but this is a situation where I get it. These guys are older. They're 26 years old, although that's kind of the tipping point, right? 28 is kind of now you're getting dusty. 26 is like, okay, this is like probably your final really good productive year unless you can just get a ton of touchdowns in the NFL for fantasy purposes. Todd Gurley has nobody behind him in his backfield, literally nobody behind him. He's still 26, and the injury concerns that everybody wants to yell about, they did not come out last year. He was 6th overall in snap percentage. He played behind the dead last ranked offensive line last year, so played behind a terrible offensive line, so that probably impacted his overall numbers. Did not get as many touches in the receiving game for whatever reason that is, and he played the 6th most snaps amongst any running back in the league. He was healthy. He played all 16 games. He obviously spiked for touchdowns because the Rams give their running backs touchdowns or opportunities in the red zone. We only had 31 receptions last year. If that number comes up in this pass-heavy offense of Atlanta, that's going to be in the red zone a lot. Yeah, Todd Gurley is no doubt in my mind, if he plays 16 games, going to see 300-plus touches on a one-year contract. It's just a little bit confusing to me that people keep still pointing to this knee injury, this arthritis in the knee, which it sounds very scary, and it should be, but it didn't show up at all last year. Like in 16 games, it didn't show up. He still got his touches. Leonard Fournette, I get it, contract year. They didn't pick up his 5th-year extension. He's not going to be with this team anymore. Okay, so why should I be worried about that for this specific year? Who's behind him? Raiko Armstrong, who barely got any touches last year, and they bring in Chris Thompson. I'm supposed to be scared of Chris Thompson. Laviska Shenault, I hear, is now going to be a running back all of a sudden for the people who want to make cases against Leonard Fournette. Sure, Laviska Shenault might see 1 or 2 carries a game as a wildcat type of a player or whatever they're going to do. How is that going to impact in a dramatic way Leonard Fournette? So Leonard Fournette, 2nd in the league last year in routes run, overall snaps. Like this is not going to be a guy who I think just falls off the face of the earth. I don't know if he catches as many balls as he did last year, but he's surely not going to see this insanely dramatic hit to his overall receptions and routes run. He literally went to a deserted island last year to train to improve his overall physique and his overall endurance and ability and speed. And number 2, to improve his pass catching game role. So the guy who goes to a deserted island to improve his pass catching game role to be more versatile. And then he comes out and does exactly that, running 483 routes only behind Christian McCaffrey and seeing 100 targets. So even if the targets drop to 75, this is a guy who only scored 3 touchdowns last year on 265 carries. That is surely going to change. So he's a top 20 overall play for me, my RB14. So the rest of my ranks are on the board right now. It goes from 20 to 25, Allen Robinson, a guy who I'm very high on, my wide receiver 6, a guy who was fantastic last year, especially to start the season off, a 30% red zone target share, and probably at least an improved quarterback play as long as Nick Foles takes over there. Contested catch artist, never had a good quarterback from college with Christian Hackenberg to the NFL with Blake Bortles and Mitch Trubisky. Nick Foles, crazy that he's going to be this guy's best quarterback, and that just speaks to the pedigree and the talent and the underappreciation that we have for how good Allen Robinson actually is. Chris Godwin's my wide receiver 7, and I continue to want to move him down depending on if Antonio Brown signs there. But look, you have Rob Gronkowski, who with Tom Brady is going to get a lot of red zone usage, a lot of middle of the field usage. They want to go more 2 tight end sets, which means Chris Godwin moves to the outside, which when he was at Penn State, he was fine on the outside, but Mike Evans is definitely the better outside receiver. And if he's going to be targeted more by Tom Brady, that just hurts overall Chris Godwin. So I bump him down a little bit. It's nothing dramatic, but he's now my wide receiver 7 instead of a lot of people having him as like their 4 or 5 or 6. You get a couple running backs here to close it out with Aaron Jones and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 22nd overall Jones, 24th overall Edwards-Helaire. I actually had Edwards-Helaire as my like RB14 ahead of Aaron Jones, Todd Gurley, and Leonard Fournette for a while, but now it's just a touch issue for me. He was taken in the first round, so that's good. So he should probably see around 180 to 200 touches, I would imagine, this year, but having no rookie minicamp and all season could impact that a little bit. Even if it impacts it by only 1 touch a game, those 16 touches are going to be very important. And we just got dropped from the best system you could have been in last year in LSU to the best system you could be in the NFL with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid Chiefs offense, where running backs score 1.7 touchdowns per game in this offense. So he's still going to be somebody that I want to be owning. That's why he's a top 25 pick for me. That's why if you're picking at the end of the second round and say you draft yourself a Christian McCaffrey to start off your draft, and then you can go ahead and get Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I don't hate that move. The issue is he's being taken a lot earlier in the second round, and I just never get him. And yeah, there's a man here in DeAndre Hopkins, my 23rd overall player, my wide receiver 8. I'm lower on DeAndre Hopkins. He's switching teams during a pandemic. That's an issue. He sees 150 targets a year when he's with the Texans and his stable quarterback, the guy he has chemistry with, in Deshaun Watson. Now you're going to an offense that doesn't threaten the ball downfield as much, although Murray does throw a good deep ball and a decent deep ball. He improved throughout the end of the season. But they also go 3 wide and 4 wide receiver sets a lot, and that usually means you spread the ball out. Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, maybe Andy Isabella this year, right? They have some tight end playing Dan Arnold there now. I'm not going to really hype him up. Kenyon Drake out of the backfield if he sees the receptions that a lot of people are expecting him to see. So if you go from DeAndre Hopkins being a red zone beast and darling in 150 to 170 target seasons to now he only sees 100 and let's say 28 targets, right? Which is still good target share, but it drops by 20 or 30, not seeing as much red zone usage, having a little bit more, maybe let's just say inaccuracy in his passes, not having as much chemistry. This drops him. Now he's still a top 10 wide receiver, but I'm not going to rank him a third, fourth, or fifth overall like everybody else. No, I'm actually going to take a stance on this, rank him 8th overall wide receiver, 23rd in my rankings, and it just means I'm not going to get much or any of him. And then our first tight end overall, Travis Kelce. If you're drafting in 12-team drafts, well, then he's going to be the first pick of the third round for me based on my rankings. Back-to-back years as the tight end number 1, finished first in reception yards, targets, total everything last year, right ahead of George Kittle, who I actually have ranked 26, so there's a spoiler for you. So these guys I'm fine taking the beginning of the third round. A lot of people take them in the second round, though, so they're just never there. So that's where I'm at. These are my top 25 overall rankings. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'll kind of unclose most of them right now, top 14. Hope that you enjoyed this video. This is something that I enjoy doing. I'll continue to be putting out these videos. If you could hit me with the like button and the big old subscribe button if you did enjoy this content, I greatly do appreciate all of that, and thank you so much for your support. If you want the full list of the 150 and then my position by position rankings, you can check that out on the draft guide down below. If you just want to check out my top 25 rankings, which I think I have to update that Excel doc. I haven't updated in a couple of days. I changed some things in my rankings. You can check that out for free down below, the top 25. But my overall rankings, tiers, all that stuff, the draft strategy guide, all the things are going to be linked down below in the Supreme Draft Guide. Just $10 for a limited time offer. Get it now down below. Follow me on Twitter at SalVetriDFS and reach out in the comment section below or on Twitter with any questions that you might have. Thank you so much for tuning into this one, and I'll see you all in the next one.